So quotations are a way to highlight text and make it show up better on your page. The first and most commonly used quotation is the block quote. And so I'm going to write one of my favorite quotes. All cats are black after midnight. And then I'm going to add some text in here so you can see the difference. Add a short paragraph. And then when we preview it, as you can see, the quote text is indented slightly. That's really the only difference that block quote does in most browsers, is indent it. One of the frustrations people have is that block quotes are quotations and they don't have quote marks. But you can fix that with CSS. So let's go into our CSS and you can add block quote as your selector. You say content, open quote. And then here's the tricky part. I have to tell it that I want this before the block quote. So what I'm basically selecting is I'm selecting the block quote, but I'm saying before the block quote, place an open quote content. And then we want to put one at the end, so we'll say the same thing, block quote. And this time we're going to say after content, close quote. And then if we preview, now as you can see, the browser has added a quote at the beginning and a quote at the end. Now, one thing you want to do is you want to test to make sure that this happens in all browsers. Some older versions of IE do not support the content style property. For the longest time, Microsoft claimed that content should be separated from the presentation, and arguably, this is placing content into the CSS. But I think most of the time, the way it's intended to be used is just like I did now, to add a style feature, in this case a quote mark around it. But I could actually put in quotes my favorite quote. And as you can see, it has added the content to the page. And that's why some browsers don't support it. So I recommend not relying on this as your only way of getting open and close quotes around your block quote tags, but it is a good way to get it in most browsers. One thing you want to remember with block quote is it's indented, but you should not use it to indent text. If that's the only reason you're using the block quote is to indent the text, take a step back and use a CSS property that we'll learn in a future lesson in order to indent that text. Because that's not the intention of block quote. Block quote is representing, it's a semantic tag, as I talked about before, that represents a quotation. If you're using it just to indent, you are mixing the style with the content, and you should stop. The other type of quotation is an inline quotation. And this works pretty much the same as block quote. It's just instead of being a separate block, it's right in line with the text. So I'm going to write my favorite Heine quote is Q. All cats are black after midnight. Now, when we preview it, the thing that you're going to note is that in this browser, the Q tag adds an open quote and a close quote at the end of the quotation to make it stand out from the surrounding text. Other browsers might make it italics. Other browsers might not do anything at all. It just depends on the browser. It's not going to be indented as the block quote is, but it will show up in your text. And the thing is that then, like everything else, you can then style it. You could say, I want my quotes to have a background color of yellow to make them stand out on the page. I'm going to add a little more text. And as you can see now, my quotation is called out in yellow. The surrounding text in the paragraph around it is the same white background that is normal. The other thing you want to know about quotations is sometimes you're going to want to cite them. You can do that with the cite attribute. All that is CITE, cite, and then the URL where you can find a reference to that quotation. I just made up a fake URL here, but you can put anything you want there. You can actually put just plain text, Robert, because it doesn't really show up on the page. Some browsers, if you mouse over it, will show it up. Sometimes if you right-click on it, it'll show up, but most of the time it doesn't show up at all because it's just meant to be a citation telling people who are viewing the code or telling the browser where that quote can be found or who it is by. So that's two different ways you can create quotes in HTML.